Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. We are diving into something today which should really resonate with a lot of you out there, the impact-driven process. It's all about making sure your work really counts. So often I feel like we get so caught up in shipping features and like hitting deadlines, but sometimes done doesn't necessarily equal meaningful impact. So this deep dive is going to kind of unpack how we can all shift our focus from just completing tasks to actually like really making a difference.
Yeah, it's kind of a subtle shift, but it's really important. We need to kind of evolve, I guess, from just like checking boxes to thinking about, how are our efforts actually contributing to like real measurable outcomes?
Exactly. And the source material that we're looking at today, the impact-driven process, IDP, how to ensure your work makes a difference, really dives deep into this concept. And it even opens with a scenario that I'm sure a lot of us can relate to. Imagine pouring your heart and soul into like a project only to see it fizzle out after launch. It can be really disheartening when you invest so much effort into something that ultimately like fails to make the impact you were hoping for.
Yeah, the source material kind of argues that this happens because traditional development cycles, they kind of put KPI analysis at the end.
Yeah.
We get so focused on just building and shipping that sometimes we forget to ask that really crucial question. Did this actually like move the needle?
It's like baking a cake and only tasting it after it's completely cooled down. You might have a beautiful cake, but if it doesn't taste good, what was the point?
That is a great analogy. The impact-driven process, or IDP, aims to address this by like baking in, I guess, the measurement and iteration from the very beginning.
Okay, so let's unpack this IDP framework. The source material outlines like 4 core steps, so where do we even begin?
Well, it all starts with defining your objective, right?
Yeah.
What specific change are you hoping to achieve? What problem are you trying to solve? And how will you measure success? And that's where key performance indicators or KPIs come in. They're kind of like the yardstick by which you measure the impact of your work.
So we're not just saying, hey, let's build this new feature,
No.
but we want to achieve X, and we'll know we've been successful when we see a measurable change in Y.
Precisely. That clarity of purpose is super important. The second step is to assemble your team, what the source material calls the effort team. So this could be like an existing group or like representatives from different teams. But the key is to have like a dedicated team that's all focused on driving this specific impact.
Interesting. So it sounds like having that right team from the very start is crucial. What comes after you've set these clear objectives and you've assembled your team? What then?
The next stage is ideation and prioritization. So this is where the team will kind of brainstorm potential solutions. The source material calls lifters. The goal here is to generate like a bunch of different ideas for how you could achieve your defined objective.
So it's like a brainstorming session, but with this laser focus on impact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then comes a really crucial part, prioritization. The team needs to look at all these potential lifters and assess them based on their potential impact and then prioritize them accordingly. That way, you're making sure that you're focusing on the solutions that are most likely to make a difference rather than getting bogged down in, less important tasks.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've got our goals, we've got our team, and we have our prioritized list of solutions. So now what? How do we actually put these ideas into action?
That's where the fourth step comes in, quick development, release, and measurement. And this is where IDP really shines. Instead of like, going all in on this massive project, you start with like the minimum viable effort. You're kind of testing the waters before you commit significant resources.
I'm starting to see how this connects back to the idea of minimizing risk and wasted effort. It reminds me of the crawl, walk, run concept that was mentioned in the source material. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Like, how does that fit into this framework?
Absolutely. So the crawl, walk, run approach is like a core IDP principle that helps you test the impact of your work at each stage. Minimizes risk, allows you to validate your assumptions before you're committing tons of resources. The crawl stage involves just minimal effort, like the absolute minimum, to just get a sense of that initial impact. It's like you're running a small-scale experiment or you're just tweaking a few things to see what happens.
That's fascinating. So we're just dipping our toes in before doing a cannonball into the deep end. So what happens in the walk stage?
So if your crawl shows promise, then you move on and you kind of step it up to the walk stage. So here, you're going to invest a bit more in development, aiming to boost the impact that you observed in that crawl stage. You're taking bigger steps, but you're still not going all in yet. You're still carefully monitoring that data and really watching how things are affecting your key metrics.
So it's all about gathering data and letting those numbers guide your next steps.
Right. And then finally, if the walk stage is proving to be successful, then you move into the run stage.
Yeah.
This is where you go full-fledged with your rollout. You're bringing that lifter to 100% of your users or target audience. But the key here is that you only reach that run stage after you've already proven the solution's worth through all that data and observation.
That makes a lot of sense. To make this concept even more concrete, let's look at the social media advertising example that was given in the source material.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It's a perfect example of how this whole crawl, walk, run thing can play out in a real-world scenario.
So imagine you're running like a social media platform and you have this hypothesis that offering a 10% discount on every second promoted post will increase your daily ad revenue. How would you go about testing that using the whole crawl, walk, run framework?
Well, in the crawl stage, you might test this by just sending out like a promo code to a small, carefully selected group of advertisers through email or something. Just kind of dipping your toe in, seeing if there's any initial interest, if there's any uptake at all.
Oh, I see. So it's a really low-cost way to get some initial data without having to make any major changes to your platform. What would the walk stage look like in this example?
So if that initial small-scale test is showing some promising results, like, you see a big jump in ad spending from that group that got the promo code, then you move to the walk stage. You might actually, create like a little button or something right on your platform, like a promotion offer, and you can make it visible to, say, 50% of your advertisers. So you're scaling up the test, but you're still not completely going all in. And throughout this whole stage, you're super carefully monitoring that data, seeing how this is all affecting your overall ad revenue.
So by the time you actually get to that run stage where you're rolling out the discount to like everybody, all of your advertisers, you already have all of this evidence, right? You've collected it, suggesting that it's probably going to be successful. You're not just guessing, you're making those decisions based on the data at each step of the way.
Exactly. And that's the power of the whole crawl, walk, run approach within the IDP framework. Helps you to minimize that risk. You're making the best use of your resources, and you're just increasing your chances of being successful.
Yeah.
Because you're backing up each effort with actual data and observations.
This seems incredibly valuable, but I'm wondering, does the source material mention any limitations to this, or are there exceptions to this crawl, walk, run framework?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, the source material does say that flexibility is key. Crawl, walk, run. It's a good guideline, but it's not like a set of hard and fast rules. There might be situations where you don't need all three stages for a feature.
I see. So it's not a one-size-fits-all type of approach. When would it make sense to deviate from this framework?
So for example, imagine you are building a feature that is super critical for all future development. It's like a foundational piece. In that case, you might decide to bypass some of those stages and just move a little bit more quickly toward that full rollout.
I see. So it's like you're laying the groundwork for something bigger, and delaying that groundwork could have like huge implications down the line. Are there any other scenarios where you might stray from this crawl, walk, run approach?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Another scenario could be when you have a feature that you're pretty darn sure is going to be successful, based on maybe overwhelming user demand or past data. If you're pretty confident that it will be well received and will have a positive impact, it might make sense to streamline that process a little bit.
That makes sense. It sounds like the key takeaway here is to be strategic, adapt the process to meet your needs.
Exactly. The most important thing is no matter what approach you take, you are measuring the impact of your work. You want to be able to confidently say that what you're building is truly making a difference, right?
Yeah. So we've kind of shifted our focus from simply getting things done to making sure that those things that we're getting done actually really matter. We're moving beyond just checking those boxes and stepping into that realm of like creating really impactful and meaningful work.
Yeah. And that shift in mindset can be really empowering. It allows you to really align your efforts with your goals and actually make a real difference.
Yeah, it's a powerful shift. And it's important to remember that this focus on impact needs to be woven into like every step of the process. The source material actually really stresses this idea of tying every lifter, every potential solution to like a specific KPI.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
If you don't have a clear way to measure the impact of a lifter, then how can you really know if it's even worth pursuing in the first place? Does the source material offer any tips for, how to do that?
Yeah, it actually gives this like nice, clear, actionable statement to help you kind of frame this whole approach. They suggest that you phrase it like this. We assume that doing this specific action will help us increase this particular KPI from where it is now to where we want it to be.
Oh, that's a great point. I love that because it forces you to be really specific about like the impact you're hoping to achieve. It takes the guesswork out of it. Exactly. And then by, constantly measuring and analyzing those results, you're able to make those data-driven decisions about, whether to keep investing in certain lifter or whether it's time to kind of shift gears and try something else.
That data-driven decision-making piece seems really key here. You're not just relying on gut feelings or assumptions, but you're letting the numbers guide your strategy.
Precisely.
Mm.
And that's like one of the biggest strengths of the whole IDP approach. It provides this framework for making these smarter, more strategic decisions, which should lead to better outcomes overall.
So we've been talking a lot about the crawl, walk, run stages of IDP, but I know there's more to it than just those 3 steps. Can we circle back to those 4 core steps you mentioned earlier and kind of dive into some of the strategic elements like, really clearly defining objectives and building that right team?
Yeah, for sure. While crawl, walk, run is a super valuable tool for testing and iteration, it's just as important to lay that solid foundation, but really nailing those objectives and putting together the A-team.
What are some of the nuances of, like, defining objectives?
Yeah.
It seems like it's a lot more than just saying, hey, we want to increase user engagement.
Right. You hit the nail on the head. It's not just that simple.
Oh.
Defining your objectives actually involves a lot of careful thought about several things. First, you really need to pinpoint the problem you're trying to solve, or like the opportunity you're trying to, grab. What is the actual challenge and what do you want to see happen?
It's about getting to the root of the issue and not just focusing on the surface symptoms.
Exactly. And then you have to think about who you're targeting. Who are you trying to reach with this whole initiative? What are their needs and behaviors? Because understanding your audience is absolutely critical for, coming up with goals that are relevant and achievable.
And of course, as we mentioned before, you need to choose those KPIs, the ones that are going to let you track your progress and measure how well you're doing. What are some of the things to consider when it comes to selecting the right KPIs?
Yeah, choosing the right KPIs is super important. You want to make sure you're tracking things that really matter and that, align with your big picture goals. The most important thing is that your KPIs should directly link back to those objectives that you just spent all that time defining. They need to give you a clear picture of whether or not you're moving in the right direction.
So for instance, if your objective is to increase user engagement, you might track things like how many daily active users you have, how long people are spending on your platform, or how many interactions each user has.
Yep. Those are all super relevant KPIs that could give you valuable insights into user engagement. Another thing to think about is making sure that your KPIs are measurable. You need to be able to actually put numbers to them and track changes over time.
That makes sense. You can't manage what you can't measure, as they say.
Exactly. And lastly, your KPIs should be actionable. You should be able to take something away from them to help you make better decisions and adjust your strategy. If a KPI isn't really giving you any useful information, it might be a sign that you're tracking the wrong thing.
Okay, so we've got the defining objectives part down. What about putting together the right team? What are the most important things to think about when you're assembling your effort team?
Yeah, getting the right people on board is just as important as having those crystal clear goals. The source material really stresses that your effort team should be made up of people who are not only skilled and knowledgeable, but also like really genuinely passionate about the project's goals.
Yeah, that passion element is huge.
Yeah.
It's one thing to have the skills to do the job, but it's another level when people truly care about what they're working on.
Absolutely. When people really believe in the project, they're more likely to go above and beyond, think outside the box, and just keep pushing through when things get tough. That can make all the difference.
So how do you find those passionate individuals? Is it as simple as just asking around, or is there a more strategic way to go about it?
It's kind of both. You want to start by identifying people who have the skills and experience you need to actually execute the project. But beyond that, you got to look for those folks who have a genuine interest in the problem you're tackling, the opportunity you're going after.
So it's finding that sweet spot where skills and passion collide.
Exactly. And once you've got your dream team assembled, it's so important to make sure everyone feels comfortable speaking their mind, collaborating, and that there's that foundation of trust. This is how you make sure that everyone feels good about sharing ideas, giving feedback, and working together towards that common goal.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's not just about getting the right people in the room, but it's about creating an environment where they can really shine and do their best work. Does the source material recommend any specific strategies or techniques for creating that kind of collaborative environment?
Yeah, it emphasizes making sure that roles and responsibilities are super clear within the team. Everyone needs to be on the same page about what they're supposed to be doing, what they're accountable for, and how their piece of the puzzle fits into the bigger picture.
That clarity is key, for sure. It helps to prevent confusion, people doing the same work twice, and potential conflicts down the road.
Totally. The source material also suggests having these regular check-in meetings or progress updates to keep everyone in the loop and make sure everyone's still moving in the same direction. It's like a space where team members can share updates, talk about any roadblocks, and make adjustments to the plan as needed.
That regular communication piece seems crucial, especially in today's fast-paced world where things change constantly.
You got it. And beyond the formal structure, it's also important to create opportunities for people to connect on a more informal level, just to hang out and bond as a team.
Yeah.
This could be something as simple as grabbing lunch together or having a team outing. These informal interactions really help to build relationships and that sense of camaraderie, which leads to better collaboration and teamwork overall.
I love that. It's recognizing that people are the heart of any successful project, and making that effort to build those connections can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. When you have a team that gels well, that's aligned around a common goal, and is pumped about making a difference, that's when the magic happens and you see truly impactful work.
That's a perfect segue to the next thing I wanted to chat about. The source materials focus on connecting every lifter to a specific KPI. Can we unpack that a little bit more and explore how to really effectively link those actions to measurable results?
Definitely. That link between what you're doing and the outcome you're seeing is like the bedrock of the entire impact-driven process. It's about moving beyond vague ideas and zeroing in on tangible, measurable results.
You mentioned before that the source material provides this super helpful statement. We assume that doing this specific thing will help us increase this KPI from where it's at now to where we want it to be. Can you walk us through an actual example of how that might play out in the real world?
For sure. Let's go back to that social media example we talked about earlier with the 10% discount on every other promoted post to increase daily ad revenue. So using that statement as a template, you might say something like, we think that offering this 10% discount will bump our daily ad revenue from $10,000 to $12,000.
I love that. It clearly lays out the action you're taking, the KPI you're tracking, and the outcome you're aiming for. It's crystal clear.
Exactly. And by approaching it this way, you're creating this super clear path to actually measuring how effective your efforts are. You're not just throwing things at the wall and hoping they stick. You're setting those measurable goals and then tracking your progress along the way.
That data-driven approach is so valuable. It lets you tweak things on the fly and course correct if things aren't panning out the way you expected.
Exactly. It's all about being agile, responsive, and constantly learning from the data you're gathering.
Okay, so we've talked about defining objectives, assembling that perfect team, and connecting your actions to measurable outcomes. What other key takeaways does the source material highlight when it comes to making a real impact?
One thing that really jumped out at me was this idea of always looking for ways to improve IDP isn't a one-and-done deal. It's a continuous cycle of planning, testing, measuring, and refining.
That makes a lot of sense. It's
Yeah.
all about creating that culture of always learning and getting better, where you're constantly trying to do things better and make a bigger impact.
You got it. And the source material also emphasizes the importance of celebrating those wins along the way. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and forget to acknowledge those successes, no matter how big or small they are.
I love that point. Celebrating wins is so important. It not only boosts morale, but also reinforces that idea of focusing on impact. It shows you're not just going through the motions, but actually achieving real, tangible results.
Exactly. And it's important to celebrate those wins not just within the team, but also with stakeholders and leadership. This helps to build buy-in and support for the IDP approach, which can lead to greater adoption and impact across the entire organization.
It's about creating a culture where everyone gets the importance of focusing on impact and where wins are acknowledged and celebrated.
Precisely. And at the end of the day, that's what IDP is all about, creating a more impactful, effective, and fulfilling way to work.
It really feels like the impact-driven process is all about changing our whole relationship with work, moving beyond just mindlessly finishing tasks and really zeroing in on how our efforts are actually impacting the world around us.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. It's this fundamental mind shift, that can completely transform not just how we work, but also how we feel about our work, like our sense of purpose.
And I think that's such a powerful message for anyone out there who wants to make their work matter. It's not about checking off those to-dos, it's about making a real difference.
Absolutely. And IDP gives us the framework to do that.
Yeah.
It gives us the tools and strategies to make sure that what we're doing is actually leading to meaningful results.
One thing that I found really interesting about the source material was how much it emphasized flexibility. We've been talking a lot about the whole crawl, walk, run approach and how it helps to minimize risk and maximize impact. But the source material also acknowledges that this framework isn't always about following a strict step-by-step process. There are times when it actually makes more sense to maybe adjust or even totally deviate from that traditional crawl, walk, run approach.
You're right. It's important to remember that IDP is like a guide, not a rule book. You need to be able to flex and adapt it to fit your specific situation and your needs.
So when might it make sense to ditch the whole crawl, walk, run thing?
Well, like we talked about earlier, there might be situations where a feature is absolutely essential for everything else you're building in the future, or maybe you're just super confident that it's going to be a hit based on what users are saying or data you've already collected. In those cases, it could make sense to, maybe skip a few steps and move a little faster towards a full launch.
I see. It's about recognizing that sometimes being quick and adaptable is more important than sticking to a rigid process.
Exactly. But even if you're streamlining things, the main idea still stays the same. You have to measure the impact of what you're doing. Whether you're using the full IDP framework or taking a more customized approach, that focus on measurement makes sure that you're not just shipping features for the sake of it, but actually shipping features that are going to make a difference.
So it's not about blindly following the rules, but being thoughtful and intentional, always keeping that end goal of impact in mind.
Precisely. It's about letting data guide you, making informed decisions, and constantly tweaking and improving based on what you're learning along the way.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm really struck by how simple yet powerful the impact-driven process is. At its core, it's about asking those key questions, challenging assumptions, and staying laser-focused on what truly matters.
I think that's a great way to sum it up. It's about changing our perspective from just outputs to outcomes, from simply doing the work to making sure that work actually moves the needle.
And I think that's a message that's going to hit home for anyone who truly wants to create positive change in the world. It's a reminder that every single one of us has the power to make an impact, no matter what our job or industry.
Definitely. And with the impact-driven process, we've got this awesome roadmap to help us unlock that power and use it to create real, lasting impact.
So as you dive into your next project, big or small, I challenge you to stop and ask yourself, how will I know this has made a difference? Let that question guide your decisions, your actions, and even how you celebrate your successes.
And keep in mind that impact isn't always about those huge, splashy initiatives. Sometimes the most meaningful impact comes from all those tiny improvements we make every single day.
That's so true. It's about that constant commitment to getting better, to making a difference, no matter how small it might seem at first.
Exactly. And by embracing that mindset, by putting impact front and center, we can create a ripple effect that goes way beyond just our own work.
Yeah.
We can inspire others and contribute to positive change in the world.
Amazingly put. And that's a wrap for a deep dive today. A huge thank you to everyone for joining us. Don't forget to share your thoughts, questions, and your IDP wins with us on social media. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep making a real difference.